You're nothing but a liar and a failure, Dad. Mom made sure you'd get nothing from her estate. The words hit me harder than the chill wind sweeping down Main Street in Lincoln, Nebraska. My son, Brandon, said them with a smirk, while my daughter, Rachel, giggled, as if rehearsing their little performance for weeks. I sat at the end of the polished mahogany table in the law office, the faint aroma of coffee and old leather filling my senses, letting their words land without flinching. I'm Thomas Reynolds, 60 years old, a retired construction foreman, and a man who spent decades building a life for my family from nothing. Every summer, I worked 12-hour shifts under the sun, laying foundations, pouring concrete, and managing crews, all to make sure Brandon and Rachel had a life better than mine. I fixed their bikes, drove them to every little league game, helped pay for tuition when their mother wasn't around. And now, after all I sacrificed, they were sitting across from me, dismissing my existence as if I were invisible. Before I continue, if you're new here, please like, comment, and subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Margaret, my ex-wife, had remarried 6 years ago to a banker from Omaha, a man who flaunted his wealth as if that alone proved superiority. I had walked away from the marriage with little more than my pride and a faded leather jacket, never turning back. I paid for every meal, every repair, every tuition expense quietly, without complaint, while Margaret and her new husband built a life I was never invited to join. But now, in Howard Langley's office, the lawyer carefully opened the folder and cleared his throat. This is the last will and testament of Margaret Reynolds. Brandon leaned back, crossing his arms, whispering to his sister, "See, Dad? Just like I said." "You're getting nothing," Rachel nodded, biting back a smile. Mom knew exactly what she was doing. "You don't get a thing." Howard's eyes flicked at me before continuing. "However, there's a note regarding the Maplewood Avenue property. Legally, the deed still contains the name of Mr. Thomas Reynolds." The room went silent. Brandon froze, his smirk faltering. Rachel's lips parted in shock. I felt a familiar, quiet anger, the kind that simmers for decades and finally finds its moment. They thought they had me cornered. They were wrong. "Dad, what does that mean?" Brandon finally asked, trying to mask his panic. I allowed a faint, calm smile to cross my face. "It means, my children, that some things can't be erased, no matter how loudly you claim victory. Some truths, like deeds and documents, linger, waiting for the right moment." Rachel scoffed. "You're bluffing. Mom wanted us to have it all. You're just dreaming." I leaned back, letting the weight of my presence fill the room. "Dreams? No. This is reality. And sometimes, reality doesn't care about feelings or pride or arrogance. It only cares about facts." Howard Langley adjusted his glasses. "We will need a full legal review of the property, including deeds, payments, and improvements, before any transfer can take place." Brandon's face went pale. Rachel's hands trembled slightly on the table. Their smugness, their sense of control, had evaporated like morning fog. I didn't speak immediately. Instead, I allowed the silence to linger, letting them sense that the game had shifted. They had underestimated me for decades, assuming my quiet patience and humility were weakness. They were wrong, because I had patience, I had proof, I had time, and now everything they thought they owned was about to be tested. Brandon's confidence wavered, though he tried to mask it with crossed arms and a sharp tone. "This is ridiculous, Dad. Mom would never leave you anything. You're just grasping at straws." Rachel leaned forward, voice dripping with condescension. "Seriously, Thomas, you've had your chance. You've always been a man stuck in the past, clinging to scraps and receipts. You think a piece of paper changes that?" I took a deep breath, letting their insults roll over me like wind against a brick wall. For years, I had swallowed moments like these, birthdays I was excluded from, Thanksgiving dinners where I barely got a seat, casual remarks that chipped away at my pride. I had endured them silently, believing in patience and in truth. "Funny," I said calmly, "how quickly people forget who worked their fingers to the bone to give them a life better than my own. Funny how quickly they dismiss the man who fixed every roof leak, every engine, every broken window without complaint." Howard Langley shifted in his chair. "Technically, Mr. Reynolds holds co-ownership of the Maplewood Avenue property. A legal review will determine the extent of rights and responsibilities, but no transfers can occur until that review is complete." Brandon blinked, and for a brief moment, the smirk was gone. Rachel's hand twitched nervously near her purse. "You see," I continued, "some things can't be erased. Years of sweat, financial contribution, and documented effort. They all matter, whether you acknowledge them or not." Rachel laughed nervously, trying to regain control. "This is absurd. Mom wanted us to have it. We have the will." I shook my head slowly. "Intentions don't override law, Rachel, and truth doesn't vanish because you wish it would. Every improvement I paid for, every mortgage payment I made, every dollar invested, everything is documented." Brandon's voice cracked slightly, betraying panic. "But we handled everything else. Mom trusted us with her finances." I leaned forward, my eyes calm but firm. "And yet, there are gaps, overlooked details, mistakes that could unravel much of what you think is secure. Funny, isn't it, how arrogance blinds people?" Howard cleared his throat. "Any legal attempt to falsify or hide information could have consequences. Mr. Reynolds's claim is documented and supported, which will hold weight in court," Rachel whispered to Brandon, almost afraid to speak above the legal jargon. He's serious. He has the receipts." "All of them." I smiled faintly, letting the quiet weight of years of patience settle over them. For decades I had been underestimated, dismissed, and ridiculed. And now, for the first time, they could see it. The quiet man they mocked was ready, fully prepared, and armed with the undeniable truth. Brandon's hands clenched, his jaw tightening. "You can't do this, Dad. You're ruining everything." "Everything?" I repeated softly, almost to myself. "No, I'm restoring balance. Respect doesn't come from fear or wealth. It comes from truth. And finally, the truth is being recognized." Howard looked at me, eyebrows raised. "Mr. Reynolds, if you proceed, this could get complicated. Their financials, property transfers, liens, everything could come under review. It won't just be about the house." I nodded slowly. "I understand. And I'm ready. Let them come. The truth can withstand scrutiny. And sometimes it's those who underestimate quiet patience who are exposed the most." Brandon and Rachel exchanged a glance, their arrogance finally cracked, replaced by fear and uncertainty. They were beginning to understand that I wasn't the same man who had quietly taken every insult for decades. The quiet man they mocked had become something they could no longer ignore. And when this began, it wouldn't stop until every lie, every mismanaged detail, every false sense of security they built was fully exposed. Because patience isn't weakness, it's preparation. That night, I sat in my study, the scent of old books and brewed coffee filling the quiet room. The dim light from the desk lamp fell across stacks of papers, receipts, contracts, mortgage statements, every document meticulously organized over decades. Outside, the quiet streets of Lincoln were empty, the occasional honk from a passing car, the only reminder that life went on, oblivious to the storm brewing in my life. I leaned back in my chair, fingers steepled, and reflected on the situation. Brandon and Rachel had spent years underestimating me, assuming my quiet patience and humility were weakness. They mocked me openly at the lawyer's office, scoffed at the idea that I could assert any claim over the Maplewood Avenue property. But I had spent decades preparing for moments like this, and tonight I would ensure I was ready. First, I needed to ensure my evidence was airtight. Every mortgage payment, every home improvement receipt, every bank transfer, everything had to be perfectly accounted for. I reviewed the stack of documents carefully, double-checking dates, amounts, and signatures. This was the kind of attention to detail that had allowed me to build my life from nothing, and it would now serve as the foundation of my case. Next, I contacted Howard Langley. Howard, we need to make sure the court sees everything. Not just the house, but every financial contribution, every improvement, every lien I've covered. Howard's voice was calm, measured. Thomas, this could get complicated, but your documentation is thorough. If presented correctly, it could completely shift the balance in your favor. Small-town courts may not like drama, but they respect evidence. I'm ready, I said simply. It's not about drama. It's about truth and respect. Things I've been denied for decades. Over the next few days, I quietly reached out to neighbors, former colleagues, and local contractors who had witnessed my work on the house. Small-town gossip traveled fast, and a few whispered confirmations of overlooked improvements, unpaid liens, and questionable property transfers by Richard Carrington came to light. If the court investigated, these small pieces could unravel the polished facade the family had built over years. Meanwhile, Brandon and Rachel were growing frantic. They called incessantly, trying to intimidate me. "Dad, just drop this," Brandon said one evening over the phone. "You're making things worse for yourself." I smiled faintly and replied, "Worse for me or worse for you?" Rachel arrived at the house the next day, attempting a last-ditch effort. "Thomas, you're crossing a line." "Mom's wishes." I cut her off calmly. "No, Rachel, you're crossing a line. You forgot the years of sacrifice, the patience, the quiet work that kept everything afloat while you two grew up under the assumption that life owed you everything. You've underestimated me for the last time." By the time the hearing date arrived, I felt ready. My evidence was flawless, my approach calm, and my patience sharpened to a fine edge. I wasn't going in to yell or plead. I was going in to reveal the undeniable truth, piece by piece. And as I stepped into the courthouse that morning, the autumn air crisp against my coat, I could see the first signs of unease in Brandon and Rachel. Their stepfather, Richard Carrington, who had once carried himself with the confidence of a man untouchable, now shifted nervously in his seat. This wasn't just a legal battle. It was the culmination of decades of being underestimated, dismissed, and mocked. And for the first time, every lie, every arrogance, every false sense of security they had built was about to be exposed to everyone in Cedar Rapids, because patience is preparation. And preparation, when combined with truth, can bring even the proudest empire to its knees. The courtroom was nearly full, the polished wood benches creaking under the weight of curious neighbors, distant relatives, and a few familiar faces from my construction days. Cedar Rapids was small, and news traveled fast. Everyone knew about the Reynolds family drama, and now they were about to witness it unfold in full. Brandon and Rachel sat stiffly at the plaintiff's table, their eyes darting nervously to me as I walked in with Howard Langley by my side. Richard Carrington tried to maintain an air of confidence, but the tight lines in his jaw betrayed him. For once, the man who had thrived on arrogance and wealth looked uncertain. Judge Judith Miller called the session to order. "We are here to review claims concerning the Maplewood Avenue property, formerly belonging to Margaret Reynolds. Mr. Reynolds, you may present your case." I stepped forward, calm, deliberate, and measured. "Your Honor, the property in question was built, maintained, and financially supported in large part by me over several decades. The deeds, mortgages, and improvements all bear my contributions. I am here not to seek vengeance, but to assert the truth and ensure legal recognition of my rights. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Brandon's smirk had vanished. Rachel's fingers twitched nervously on her purse strap. Carrington's confident posture stiffened, and he whispered something to his attorney, who shook his head subtly. Howard Langley began presenting the evidence: mortgage receipts, construction contracts, plumbing and roofing invoices, ledger books, and bank statements. Each document meticulously chronicled the labor, time, and money I had poured into the property. The gallery went silent, absorbing the depth and thoroughness of the proof laid out before them. Brandon finally spoke, voice cracking slightly. "But Mom's will. It says everything goes to us." I met his gaze evenly. Intentions don't erase facts. Deeds and contracts exist regardless of wishes, and decades of documented work cannot be dismissed with a smirk or a whispered excuse. Rachel tried to interrupt, but I continued, letting my words land slowly. "You both underestimated me. You assumed quiet patience was weakness. You assumed your mother's wealth, your stepfather's influence, and your own arrogance would be enough to erase reality. But reality has a way of catching up." Judge Miller flipped through the documents carefully. Her frown deepened as she noted discrepancies in Carrington's financial records, overlooked liens, mismanaged transfers, and unexplained payments. She looked up at me, nodding slightly. "The documentation provided is thorough. The court will need to conduct a detailed review, but Mr. Reynolds's claim is substantiated. Distribution of the property is suspended until further review." Brandon's face went pale. Rachel's hands clenched tightly. Carrington slumped in his chair, the weight of exposure finally settling on him. I allowed a faint, calm smile to cross my face. This was not about humiliation. It was about restoring dignity and revealing truth. My patience, sacrifices, and decades of quiet work had spoken louder than their arrogance ever could. Neighbors in the gallery whispered among themselves, some nodding in quiet approval. Cedar Rapids had never seen a quiet, hard-working father, long dismissed, rise so decisively and reclaim his respect. Howard closed the folder, glancing at me with a mixture of pride and relief. "You've handled this with patience and dignity. The rest is in the court's hands now." I exhaled slowly, the tension in my shoulders easing. The first cracks were visible. The first defenses had fallen, and I knew the unraveling of arrogance, entitlement, and lies had only just begun. Because sometimes the quietest storms are the most devastating, and patience, paired with truth, is unstoppable. A week later, the final court session was held, and the atmosphere in the McLean County Courthouse was electric. Friends, neighbors, and even some distant relatives had gathered, drawn by curiosity and the gravity of the situation. The Reynolds family, Brandon, Rachel, and Richard Carrington, sat nervously at the plaintiff's table, the confidence they had carried for so long replaced by unease. Judge Judith Miller called the session to order. "We are here to finalize the review of property claims and related assets concerning the estate of Margaret Reynolds. Mr. Reynolds, you may present any closing statements." I stood, calm, deliberate, letting the weight of decades of work, sacrifice, and patience settle into my voice. "Your Honor, the house on Maplewood Avenue, along with other related property investments, were maintained and improved primarily through my labor, finances, and diligent record-keeping. This is not about vengeance. It is about justice, respect, and the acknowledgement of truth that has been denied for far too long." Howard Langley presented the evidence one last time. Mortgage payments, construction receipts, bank statements, and ledger books meticulously documenting every investment I had made. The courtroom was silent, every eye fixed on the documentation, every person realizing the enormity of what had been overlooked. Richard Carrington's face was pale. Brandon's jaw tightened. Rachel's fingers trembled against her purse. Their arrogance, their belief that the estate was theirs for the taking, had crumbled under the undeniable truth. Judge Miller's voice cut through the silence. After reviewing all documents and testimonies, it is clear that Mr. Reynolds has substantial legal claims to the property in question. Distribution of the estate is hereby adjusted to reflect his rightful ownership. Any attempts to transfer property or assets without his consent are null and void. The courtroom erupted in quiet whispers. Brandon's shoulders slumped. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. Carrington shook his head, muttering under his breath, unable to deny the reality before him. I allowed myself a small, calm smile. Not a smile of triumph, but of quiet satisfaction. Years of being dismissed, belittled, and underestimated could not erase the work I had done, the sacrifices I had made, or the dignity I had earned. Outside the courthouse, neighbors approached, offering congratulations and nods of respect. Some commented on how patience and quiet diligence had brought about a reckoning in a way that no arrogance or entitlement could withstand. Brandon and Rachel avoided my gaze, understanding for the first time that respect cannot be demanded. It must be earned, and when it is long denied, even the most arrogant can be humbled by the persistence of truth. I walked to my truck, the crisp autumn air of Lincoln filling my lungs. The faint scent of courthouse polish lingered, mingling with the earthy smell of the streets. I didn't need the house, the money, or public acknowledgement. My peace came from standing tall, asserting the truth, and reclaiming the dignity that had been denied for decades. As I drove home, the quiet streets of Lincoln seemed calmer, the tension of years of dismissal replaced by a serene sense of justice. The arrogance of my children and their stepfather had been exposed. The truth had prevailed. And in that quiet victory, I found peace. Because sometimes the strongest storms are the quietest ones. And patience, combined with truth, always wins. Tell us your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories.